Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. A Perfect Facade. Vince Mercer believed in two things: loyalty and consequences. As the owner of Apex Security Solutions, a highly successful private security firm that specialized in protecting high-net-worth clients, he'd built his reputation on discretion and effectiveness. At 42, Vince had the physique of someone who hadn't forgotten his military training, broad-shouldered with vigilant hazel eyes that missed nothing. His salt and pepper hair was the only concession to age. For 15 years, Vince thought he'd constructed the perfect life with Natalie. They lived in an exclusive neighborhood in a modernist house with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private lake. Their daughter, Melissa, now 14, excelled in school and showed promise as a competitive swimmer. To outsiders, the Mercers represented success, stability, and happiness. "You worry too much," Leo Duran told him over drinks one evening at the Vault, an upscale bar that catered to the city's elite. Leo had been Vince's friend since their Special Forces days, now his head of operations. "Natalie's just busy with that charity foundation." Vince swirled the whiskey in his glass. "She's been busy 4 nights this week. The Fairchild Foundation only meets on Tuesdays. Maybe she's planning something for your anniversary," Leo suggested with a shrug. 15 years is a big one. Vince's phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. "Mom said she's staying at Aunt Pamela's tonight. Can you pick me up from swim practice?" "Pamela, right," Vince muttered. "The friend who's never home when I call." Something shifted in Vince's expression, a coldness settling behind his eyes. Leo recognized it from their military days, the look that preceded calculated action. "You're going to look into it." It wasn't a question. "Wouldn't you?" Vince responded, already scrolling through his phone to a specialized app. As the head of a security company, Vince had resources most people didn't, including GPS tracking on family vehicles. The dot showing Natalie's car wasn't anywhere near Pamela Wright's neighborhood. It was stationary at the Lakeside Residences, a luxury apartment complex on the other side of town. "Maybe she's visiting someone else," Leo offered weakly. "For the 3rd Thursday in a row?" Vince finished his drink. "No, it's time I see what my wife's been protecting with all those new passwords and late-night showers." Later that night, after putting Melissa to bed, Vince went to his home office. As a security expert, he knew precisely how to access the information he needed. Within an hour, he had Natalie's email password, phone records, and credit card statements. What he found hollowed him out. Dinner charges for 2 at restaurants he'd never visited. A hotel room charged 3 times in the past month. Text messages to someone saved as DR with language that left nothing to interpretation. But what truly crystallized the betrayal was a video file from his own home security system. Natalie bringing someone into their house, into their bedroom, 2 weeks ago when Vince had been on a 3-day business trip to Boston. The man was Dominic Russo, a cosmetic surgeon who served on the Fairchild Foundation board with Natalie. Vince didn't throw things or scream. Instead, he documented everything, transferring files to a secure server. Then he contacted Franklin Rhodes, the most ruthless divorce attorney in the state. "Gather everything," Franklin advised during their midnight call. "But don't confront her yet. We need to be strategic." "I want everything," Vince said, his voice eerily calm. "The house, primary custody, her reputation. Everything. With what you've shown me, we've got leverage," Franklin assured him. "But move carefully. People who feel cornered make desperate choices." Vince ended the call and sat in the darkness of his office, the screens before him illuminating his face in a cold blue glow. He pulled out a small leather notebook and began to write, not in anger, but with the precision of a man planning a military operation. The title at the top of the page, The Reckoning. Chapter 2, Shattered Glass. For 3 weeks, Vince observed, documented, and planned. He became a ghost in his own life. Present for Melissa, professional at work, and a perfect actor with Natalie. He learned her patterns with Dominic. Tuesday evenings at the Fairchild Foundation that extended to late dinners, Thursday afternoons at the Lakeside Residence's apartment that Dominic kept for out-of-town clients, an occasional weekend rendezvous when Vince traveled for work. "You're different," Leo remarked during their morning run. "Calmer. It's unsettling." "I'm just focused," Vince replied, maintaining his pace. "Did you get the files I asked for?" Leo handed over a flash drive. Dominic Russo, graduated top of his class from Johns Hopkins, built a practice focusing on rejuvenation procedures for the wealthy. Divorced 5 years ago. Wife claimed infidelity, but settled quietly. No children. Serves on 3 charity boards, all with attractive, wealthy women as members. "A predator with a pattern," Vince observed. "Yes, but a careful one. No formal complaints, stellar professional reputation." Leo hesitated. "What exactly are you planning, Vince?" "Justice," Vince said simply. "And I need one more thing from you. I need you to take Melissa camping this weekend." "I've already told her about it. She's excited." "Vince, just keep her away from the house and off social media for 48 hours. Friday arrived. Vince kissed Melissa goodbye as she left with Leo for their weekend camping trip. Then he prepared for the evening he'd orchestrated. "I've got a foundation dinner," Natalie announced, descending the stairs in a form-fitting black dress, pearls adorning her neck. At 39, she maintained her beauty through rigorous exercise, careful diet, and, Vince now knew, Dominic's discreet cosmetic touch-ups. "Actually," Vince said, "I made dinner reservations for us at Bellissimo. 15th anniversary and all." Natalie froze. "That's tonight?" "Yes." Vince smiled, watching her calculate. 7 o'clock. "I thought it was time we talked." Panic flickered across her face before she composed herself. "Let me call Pamela and cancel our plans." Vince nodded, knowing she'd be texting Dominic instead. At Bellissimo, they were seated at a private corner table. Vince ordered an expensive bottle of wine, making small talk until their appetizers arrived. "You seem distracted," he finally said. "Everything all right at the foundation?" Natalie smiled too brightly. "Just busy. Dr. Russo has a new outreach program we're implementing, providing reconstructive surgery to domestic violence survivors." "How noble of Dominic," Vince replied, using his first name deliberately. He watched as Natalie's fingers tightened around her wine glass. "I've been meaning to ask, how's the Lakeside Residence's apartment?" "Nice views." The color drained from her face. "What are you talking about?" Vince placed his phone on the table, screen up, displaying a map with a pulsing dot. "Your car is there right now. Actually, interesting, since you're sitting here with me." "Vince, but that's impossible, right? Unless someone else has your car. Perhaps the same person who's been fucking my wife in my house, in my bed, for the past 6 months." The restaurant continued its elegant hum around them, unaware of the devastation unfolding at table 19. "It's not what you think," Natalie whispered. "No." Vince lifted an eyebrow. "So you didn't give Dominic the garage door code? You didn't let him into our home 2 weeks ago when I was in Boston? You didn't book the Harborview Hotel 3 times last month?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. "I made a mistake. We can work through this." "That's where you're wrong," Vince interrupted, his voice soft but glacial. "There's nothing to work through. I've already filed for divorce. Franklin Rhodes is my attorney. You'll be served Monday morning." "Franklin Rhodes?" Natalie's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. "He's a shark." "Vince, please, think about Melissa." "I'm thinking about Melissa. That's why I've requested primary custody." Natalie's shock turned to anger. "You'll never get it. I'm her mother. A mother who chose an affair over her family." Vince stood, dropping cash on the table. "A mother who brought her lover into her daughter's home. You should check your email when you get home. I've sent you some fascinating security footage." As he walked away, Natalie called after him, her voice a desperate hiss. "You can't do this." Vince turned back, his expression impassive. "I'm not doing anything, Natalie. These are simply the consequences of your choices." When he returned home, Vince poured himself a drink and called Franklin. "She knows. Be ready for her to get desperate." "Always am," Franklin responded. "Did you stick to the script?" "Exactly as planned." Within an hour, Vince's phone exploded with notifications. Natalie had called 17 times. Pamela Wright had called 5 times. There are dozens of text messages ranging from pleading to threatening. The last one from Natalie read, "Dominic says he wants to talk to you man to man. Fix this." Vince smiled coldly at his phone. "I'm counting on it," he murmured to himself. Chapter 3. Battle Lines. The divorce proceedings were nuclear. Natalie, realizing Vince had overwhelming evidence and Franklin Rhodes's ruthless expertise, enlisted Camille Sorensen, a divorce attorney known for her scorched earth approach. What Natalie lacked in evidence, she made up for with vicious allegations. Controlling behavior. Melissa's therapist, Dr. Abigail Foster, read from her notes during her deposition. Mrs. Mercer described feeling monitored, isolated from friends. Melissa has mentioned her father's scary moods. Vince remained stone-faced, though inside he burned with betrayal. He'd insisted Melissa see a therapist after the divorce filing, wanting her to have support. Now Natalie had weaponized those sessions. Did Melissa ever directly claim abuse? Franklin asked. No, Dr. Foster admitted. But children often express trauma indirectly. Outside the deposition room, Vince confronted his soon-to-be ex-wife. Using our daughter as a weapon. Classy, Natalie. You started this war, she hissed. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect myself. Protect yourself? Vince's laugh lacked any warmth. This isn't about protection. It's about you trying to salvage your reputation and your lifestyle. You have no idea what I'm capable of, Natalie warned. Actually, I do. That's the problem. Vince turned to leave, but paused. By the way, how's Dominic handling all this? Still your knight in shining armor? A flash of uncertainty crossed Natalie's face before she masked it. He's been my rock. Interesting, because rumor has it he's been spending time with Diane Calloway, the newest board member at Fairchild. Pretty blonde, about 35. His type, wouldn't you say? The color drained from Natalie's face. You're lying. Am I? Vince shrugged. Maybe you should ask him why he canceled your dinner last Friday. As Vince walked away, he heard Natalie frantically dialing her phone. The seed was planted. 6 months into the divorce proceedings, Melissa was struggling. Despite Vince's efforts to shield her, the tension was taking its toll. Her grades slipped, she quit the swim team, and she alternated between clinging to Vince and explosive anger toward him. She blames you, Natalie said during a tense custody exchange. She knows you're the one who broke our family. No, she's confused because you're feeding her lies, Vince countered. But the truth has a way of revealing itself. That night, Melissa locked herself in her room at Vince's temporary apartment. When he finally coaxed her out, her eyes were swollen from crying. Mom says you're trying to take all her money, Melissa accused. She says we might have to move to an apartment because you're being cruel. Vince sat on the edge of her bed. Your mother is afraid and saying things that aren't true. The court will decide what's fair, but I would never let either of you struggle. But why can't you just stop fighting? Melissa pleaded. Why can't you forgive her? Vince chose his words carefully. Sometimes, actions break trust in ways that can't be repaired. But none of this changes how much I love you. You're the most important person in my life. Then why does everyone at school say you abandoned us? Melissa demanded. Grandma Evelyn told Mom that you're being vindictive and should move on like a real man. Vince's jaw tightened at the mention of his former mother-in-law. Evelyn Porter had never approved of him, believing her daughter had married beneath her station. People say a lot of things during divorce, Vince explained. Most of them aren't true, but the damage was spreading. Clients began asking discreet questions about Vince's situation. Friends took sides. Vince's mother, the only family he had left, called from Arizona. Vincent, what's this Natalie's telling me about you, installing cameras to spy on her? That doesn't sound like you. It's not true, Mom, Vince sighed. I had regular security cameras in our home, which she knew about. She's trying to paint me as obsessive because she got caught. A week later, Dominic Russo requested a meeting through his attorney. They met at a neutral location, a conference room at Franklin's office. Dominic was exactly as his photo suggested. Handsome in that artificial way of someone who'd had work done, with perfect teeth and styled silver fox hair. He carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to women's admiration. Thank you for meeting with me, Dominic began, his tone professionally sympathetic. I think we can resolve this situation like gentlemen. Vince said nothing, just watched him with unsettling intensity. Dominic shifted uncomfortably. I understand you're hurt. What Natalie and I did was wrong. But dragging this divorce out is only harming Melissa. Interesting that you mentioned my daughter. Vince finally spoke. Tell me, when you were fucking my wife in my house, did you ever think about the child whose life you were helping to destroy? Dominic flinched. That's not fair. Natalie and I. Let me make something crystal clear, Vince interrupted. You don't get to mention my daughter. You don't get to play peacemaker. You're the man who helped dismantle my family, and now you want to negotiate. I'm trying to do the right thing, Dominic insisted. Natalie is suffering. She's made mistakes, but... No, Vince cut him off again. What you're trying to do is damage control. Natalie's becoming inconvenient, isn't she? The scandal's affecting your practice. Your high society patients don't like messy, personal lives in their cosmetic surgeons. Dominic's composed facade cracked slightly. That's not. How's Diane Calloway, by the way? Vince asked casually. Still consulting on your charity work? The surgeon's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. This meeting is over, Vince stated, standing. You want to talk man to man? Here's what one man is saying to another. You helped destroy something precious to me. There will be consequences. As the divorce neared its final stages, an unexpected development arose. Melissa, now 15, asked to speak privately with the judge. Despite both attorneys' objections, Judge Montgomery granted the request. Whatever Melissa said in that private conversation changed everything. The custody arrangement shifted to a more even split, with Melissa spending alternating weeks with each parent. The financial settlement still favored Vince, but was more equitable than his original demands. She told the judge she felt used by both of you, Franklin explained. Said her mother pressured her to say you were controlling, but that you were obsessed with punishing her mother. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday, 18 months after that dinner at Bellissimo. Natalie received the lake house, but had to buy out Vince's share. Vince kept his company and most of their investments. They would share legal custody of Melissa, with physical custody split evenly. As they left the courthouse, Natalie approached Vince one last time. I hope you're satisfied, she said bitterly. You've punished me thoroughly. Vince looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. The woman he'd once loved was still physically beautiful, but her eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there before. You think this was punishment? Vince asked quietly. This was just a divorce, Natalie. The reckoning hasn't even begun. Chapter 4. Reconstructions. 1 year after the divorce, Vince had rebuilt his life. He purchased a modern hillside home overlooking the city, strategically located in Melissa's school district, but far enough from the lake house to avoid accidental encounters with Natalie. He'd thrown himself into expanding Apex security, acquiring 2 smaller firms and doubling their client roster. Outwardly, Vince appeared to have moved on. He attended Melissa's swim meets. She'd rejoined the team, maintained cordial interactions with Natalie during custody exchanges, and even occasionally dated, though never seriously. You seem better, Leo commented during their weekly drink at the vault. More like yourself. Vince smiled, a genuine expression that had become rare. Time heals, isn't that what they say? Leo studied his friend closely. That's what they say. But I know you, Vince. You don't just heal and move on. Sometimes people change. And sometimes they just get better at hiding their intentions, Leo countered. You still have that notebook you started the night you found out about Natalie and Dominic. Vince's expression revealed nothing. What makes you think that? Because I know you. Military precision. You make plans and execute them flawlessly. Vince took a sip of his whiskey. Melissa's doing better. That's what matters. And Natalie? Dominic? They're just forgiven. A coldness flickered in Vince's eyes. I never said anything about forgiveness. The truth was, Vince had spent the past year executing the first phase of a carefully constructed plan. His apparent acceptance of the divorce settlement had been strategic, meant to lull Natalie and Dominic into a false sense of security while he maneuvered the pieces into position. Natalie and Dominic had made their relationship public 3 months after the divorce, appearing together at charity functions and becoming fixtures in local society pages. 6 months later, they announced their engagement, with a wedding planned for the following summer. Vince learned most of this from Melissa, who developed a complicated relationship with her mother's fiancé. "He tries too hard," she told Vince during one of their father-daughter dinners. "Always buying me things and talking about how we're going to be a real family. How do you feel about that?" Vince asked carefully. Melissa pushed her food around her plate. "Mom seems happy, but sometimes I catch her looking, I don't know, worried, like she's waiting for something bad to happen." She looked up at her father. "You're really okay with them getting married?" "It's not up to me who your mother marries," Vince answered diplomatically. "My job is to make sure you're okay." "But they invited you to the wedding," Melissa persisted. "Are you going to go?" Vince had indeed received an invitation, a peace offering, according to the handwritten note from Natalie that accompanied it. "I'm considering it," he told his daughter. "For your sake." What Vince didn't tell Melissa was that he'd already RSVP'd. The wedding was central to his plans. Over the next months, Vince cultivated a relationship with someone crucial to his strategy. Harper Maxwell, Dominic's surgical nurse and office manager. A 40-something divorcee with a sharp mind and financial troubles, Harper had worked for Dominic for 8 years. Their chance meeting had been engineered by Vince at a cancer benefit gala. He'd done his research, knowing Harper's mother had died of breast cancer. Their conversation had been genuine. Vince's own father had died of cancer when he was 20, but the connection he fostered afterward was deliberate. "Dr. Russo works you to the bone," Vince commented during their third dinner date. "Surely he has other staff?" Harper sighed. "He's been cutting costs lately. The divorce took a financial toll, then expanding the practice." She stopped herself. "I shouldn't discuss this." "Of course," Vince agreed. "Professional discretion is important. It's the same in my business. Client confidentiality is sacred." Harper smiled gratefully. "Exactly. Though sometimes I wish I knew less about certain things." "That's the burden of being trusted," Vince said, pouring her more wine. "We become keepers of secrets." By their 7th date, Harper was confiding in him regularly. Dominic's practice was financially strained due to expensive equipment purchases and a recent malpractice settlement that had been kept quiet. He'd been cutting corners on supplies and procedures. "Nothing dangerous," Harper assured him. "Just using less expensive alternatives than what patients think they're paying for." Vince filed this information away, continuing to build Harper's trust while maintaining emotional distance. He wasn't proud of using her, but he justified it as necessary collateral damage. Meanwhile, through business connections, Vince cultivated a relationship with Richard Preston, a major investor in Dominic's practice who sat on the medical board. Richard's wife had been one of Dominic's patients. With disappointing results, she kept hidden beneath carefully applied makeup. "Between us," Richard confided during a golf game Vince had orchestrated, "I'm concerned about Russo's recent decisions. Taking on too much debt, expanding too quickly, and this lavish wedding he's planning. It's not fiscally responsible. I heard the engagement ring alone cost 6 figures, Vince remarked casually, knowing this would alarm Richard, who valued fiscal prudence. "That's exactly my point," Richard frowned. "We need a steady hand at the helm, not someone distracted by personal indulgences." As the wedding approached, Vince made his most audacious move. He hired Valerie Sinclair, a brilliant private investigator who specialized in medical fraud. Her assignment: a comprehensive investigation into Dominic's practice, focusing on billing irregularities, insurance claims, and patient complaints. "Why this particular surgeon?" Valerie asked during their initial meeting. "What's your interest?" "Professional curiosity," Vince replied smoothly. "His name keeps coming up in certain circles, and I like to be thorough." Valerie clearly didn't believe him, but her reputation for discretion was well earned. "I'll need access to insider information. Patient records, billing systems." "You'll have what you need," Vince assured her, thinking of Harper and her access to the practice's systems. 3 weeks before the wedding, Vince received Valerie's final report. It was more damning than he'd anticipated, documenting systematic overbilling, procedures performed by unauthorized personnel, reused single-use medical devices, and questionable surgical outcomes covered up through settlements and non-disclosure agreements. "This isn't just unethical," Valerie noted. "Some of this crosses into criminal territory." Vince thanked her, paid her final invoice with a generous bonus, and added the report to his growing arsenal. The final piece fell into place when Melissa called him, distraught, after a fight with her mother. "She wants me to be a junior bridesmaid," Melissa sobbed. "I told her I didn't want to be in the wedding at all, and she lost it. Said I was being manipulated by you, that you've poisoned me against her and Dominic." Vince kept his voice level, despite his anger. "What do you want to do, sweetheart?" "I don't know," Melissa admitted. "If I refuse, Mom will blame you and it'll cause more problems." But the idea of standing up there, pretending to celebrate them, her voice broke. "You don't have to decide right now," Vince assured her. "But whatever you choose, I'll support you." After calming Melissa, Vince made a call to his mother. "Would you be willing to come for the wedding?" he asked. Not for Natalie, but for Melissa. She's struggling with all this. His mother agreed immediately, concerned for her granddaughter. Vince booked her flight and accommodations, giving her no indication of what he had planned. 2 days before the wedding, Vince met with Franklin Rhodes one last time. "Everything's in order," Franklin confirmed, reviewing the documents before him. "But are you sure about this timing? It's particularly dramatic." "Timing is everything," Vince replied calmly. And Natalie always did appreciate drama. Franklin handed over a sealed envelope. "Then you're all set. Though I have to say, in 20 years of practice, this is perhaps the most meticulously planned revenge I've ever been party to." Vince took the envelope, his expression unreadable. "This isn't revenge, Franklin. It's justice." Chapter 5. The Wedding. The Bellamy Estate, a historic mansion with sprawling gardens, had been transformed for Natalie and Dominic's wedding. White roses and orchids adorned every surface, crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, and a string quartet played softly as 200 guests mingled before the ceremony. Vince arrived alone, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit. He nodded politely to familiar faces, ignoring the whispers that followed him. His presence, the ex-husband at the wedding, was the talking point of the afternoon. Melissa spotted him immediately, breaking away from the bridal party, still in her regular clothes rather than the junior bridesmaid dress. "You actually came," she said, embracing him tightly. "I said I would," Vince replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You okay?" Melissa glanced over her shoulder toward the bridal suite. "Mom's freaking out. Partly because I still haven't put on that stupid dress. Partly because Grandma Evelyn keeps making comments about the cost of everything." "Where's your grandmother?" Vince asked, scanning the crowd. "At the bar, where else?" Melissa rolled her eyes. "Mom wants me back in 20 minutes for photos." "Go on," Vince encouraged her. "We'll talk after the ceremony." As Melissa reluctantly returned to the bridal party, Vince made his way toward Evelyn Porter, who was indeed nursing a martini at the bar. At 65, Evelyn remained an imposing woman, elegantly dressed with perfectly coiffed silver hair and razor-sharp eyes that narrowed when she spotted him. "Vincent," she acknowledged coldly. "I'm surprised Natalie invited you." Melissa asked her to, Vince replied, ordering a whiskey. "And unlike some people, I don't disappoint my daughter when it matters." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Still bitter, I see. While my daughter is moving up in the world, a respected surgeon, a place in society you could never provide." Vince smiled, genuine amusement in his eyes. "Is that what you think this is? An upgrade? Fascinating." "Dominic comes from the right kind of family," Evelyn continued. "Old money connections. Something you never understood the importance of." "Understand plenty," Vince replied, "including the value of character over connections. But today's about celebration, isn't it? To new beginnings." He raised his glass and mock toast, then moved away before Evelyn could respond. The ceremony began promptly at 4 o'clock. Guests were seated in white chairs on the immaculate lawn, facing an elaborate floral arch where Dominic waited, looking polished and confident. Melissa, who had eventually agreed to wear the junior bridesmaid dress, walked down the aisle with obvious reluctance, avoiding eye contact with Dominic. When Natalie appeared, there was an audible gasp from the crowd. She was radiant in a designer gown that reportedly cost more than most people's cars, her hair and makeup flawless. For a brief moment, her eyes locked with Vince's in the audience. Something unreadable passed between them before she continued her procession. The ceremony proceeded with all the expected elements: flowery vows, exchange of platinum rings, and finally, the pronouncement of husband and wife. Throughout, Vince sat perfectly still, his expression neutral, observing everything with calculated attention. During the cocktail hour, as guests mingled on the terrace overlooking the estate's gardens, Vince maintained a low profile. He spoke briefly with his mother, who'd arrived that morning, making sure she was comfortable at her table. He exchanged pleasantries with former mutual friends who approached him with curious expressions. All the while, he kept track of Dominic, who was holding court near the bar, one arm possessively around Natalie's waist. The reception began with introductions of the wedding party. The master of ceremonies, a college friend of Dominic's with an overly enthusiastic voice, called out each pair of groomsmen and bridesmaids to polite applause. When Melissa's turn came, something shifted in the atmosphere. The MC, clearly going off script, announced, "Please welcome the girl with no father." A shocked silence fell before uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. Natalie's eyes widened in horror, but Dominic smirked, clearly in on the tasteless joke. Across the room, Melissa froze, her face crumpling as tears welled in her eyes. Vince started to rise, fury etched on his face, but his mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Not now," she murmured. "Melissa needs composure, not a scene." Evelyn Porter, 3 martinis in, took a deliberate sip of her wine and said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "It's just a joke, Vincent. Lighten up." Melissa fled to the restroom, followed quickly by Vince's mother. The MC, reading the room, hurriedly continued with introductions. When Vince's mother returned without Melissa, her expression was grim. "She's devastated. Says this isn't the first joke Dominic's made about you not being in her life anymore." Before Vince could respond, the room's attention shifted as Dominic stood, microphone in hand, for his speech. He thanked everyone for coming, praised his beautiful bride, and made the expected jokes about marriage. Then, his expression changing to something more serious, he held up an envelope. "Before we continue celebrating, there's something important I'd like to address," Dominic announced. "Many of you know that our relationship had a complicated beginning. There have been rumors, judgments, and yes, a certain individual who's tried to make our path difficult." His eyes found Vince in the crowd. Natalie tugged at his sleeve, whispering urgently, but Dominic waved her off. "I've always believed in transparency," Dominic continued, "so I'd like to clear the air once and for all." He opened the envelope with theatrical deliberation. "This is a paternity test." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the reception hall. Natalie had gone deathly pale. "I recently had the opportunity to compare my DNA with that of young Melissa," Dominic revealed, his voice carrying clearly in the now silent room. "And the results are conclusive." Vince remained perfectly still, only the slightest curl of his lips indicating any reaction. "Melissa is my biological daughter," Dominic declared. "Natalie and I had a brief relationship 16 years ago, before she met Vincent. We reconnected recently, but the truth is Melissa has always been my child, a fact Natalie kept for both of us." The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Natalie was shaking her head frantically, mouth opening and closing without sound. At that moment, the bathroom door opened and Melissa emerged, her face tear-streaked but composed. She'd heard everything. "That's a lie," she said, her voice small but clear in the momentary lull. "My father is Vince Mercer. He's always been my father." Dominic's confident smile faltered. "Sweetheart, I know this is a shock, but the science doesn't lie. We can talk about this privately." "No," Melissa interrupted, her voice stronger. "You're lying. Mom, tell him he's lying." All eyes turned to Natalie, who looked trapped between impossible choices. "Dominic, please," she whispered. "Not like this." "I have the test results right here," Dominic insisted, waving the paper. "I'm not the villain Vincent has painted me to be. I'm your father, Melissa." Vince finally stood, his movement drawing everyone's attention. Without haste, he approached Dominic, stopping just short of the small stage where the head table was positioned. "May I see that?" he asked calmly, extending his hand for the paper. Dominic hesitated, then handed it over with a triumphant expression. The truth hurts, doesn't it, Mercer? Vince scanned the document, then looked up with an expression that sent a visible chill through Dominic. Interesting. This test compares Dominic Russo's DNA with sample M001, supposedly Melissa's. He turned to the room. But there's a problem. This isn't Melissa's DNA. What are you talking about? Dominic snapped. I had her toothbrush tested. No, Vince corrected. You had a toothbrush tested. One that Harper conveniently provided from Melissa's overnight bag during her last visit to your house. A toothbrush that belonged to Melissa's friend Emma, who stayed over that weekend. Dominic's face contorted with rage. You're lying. Harper would never. Harper has been feeding me information for months, Vince revealed coldly, including your plan to claim paternity of my daughter at your wedding. A particularly vicious move, even for you. Natalie found her voice at last. Dominic, what have you done? She demanded, horror dawning on her face. Nothing, Dominic insisted. He's making this up to ruin our day. Like you made up that announcement about my daughter? Vince's voice remained terrifyingly calm. The girl with no father. The room had gone completely silent, 200 guests witnessing the spectacular implosion of what should have been a celebration. This is absurd, Dominic sputtered. Security, remove this man. Before you do that, Vince said to the uncertain-looking security personnel, you might want to see what's in my envelope. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope of his own, sealed with a legal stamp. What is this? Dominic demanded. The consequences I promised you, Vince replied simply. He broke the seal and removed several documents, handing the first to Dominic. This is a real paternity test conducted by an independent lab under court supervision. It conclusively proves that I am Melissa's biological father. Dominic's face drained of color as he scanned the document. This is a forgery. The court doesn't think so, Vince countered, handing him a second document. This is a cease and desist order preventing you from making any further false claims about Melissa's paternity. Any violation will result in significant financial penalties and possible criminal charges for fraud. Dominic staggered slightly, gripping the edge of the table. You can't. I'm not finished, Vince interrupted, turning to address the stunned guests. For those who don't know me, I'm Vincent Mercer, Melissa's father, former husband of the bride. I've kept silent about many things out of respect for my daughter, but today's events have made that impossible. He gestured toward Richard Preston, who sat rigid at a nearby table. Richard, as a major investor in Dominic's practice and a member of the medical board, you might be particularly interested in these. He handed over a thick folder. A comprehensive investigation into Dominic's medical practice, documenting fraudulent billing, insurance fraud, improper surgical procedures, and multiple cases of malpractice covered up through intimidation and non-disclosure agreements. Richard opened the folder, his expression growing grimmer with each page he turned. That's confidential information, Dominic shouted. You stole private medical records. Actually, every document in that file was obtained legally, Vince corrected him. Your patients deserve to know what they're really paying for and what's actually being injected into their bodies. Natalie had sunk into her chair, her perfect wedding disintegrating around her. Vince, please stop, she begged. Why? Vince asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Isn't transparency important? Isn't that what Dominic just said? He turned to his daughter, his expression softening. Melissa, you might want to step outside with your grandmother. Melissa shook her head, tear tracks drying on her determined face. No, I want to hear everything. Dominic lunged suddenly, grabbing for the documents in Richard's hands. This is slander. I'll sue you for everything you have, Mercer. Richard pulled back, clutching the folder. If even half of this is true, Dominic, you'll be facing criminal charges, not filing lawsuits. It's all lies, Dominic insisted, frantically turning to the guests. Can't you see what he's doing? He's obsessed with Natalie. Can't accept that she chose me. Vince smiled thinly. Is that why you've been spending Tuesday evenings with Diane Calloway at the Harborview Hotel? The same hotel where you used to meet Natalie when we were married? You're nothing if not consistent in your patterns, Dominic. Natalie's head snapped up, fresh shock on her face. What? Before Dominic could respond, Vince continued. I considered revealing all this privately. But then I thought, what better venue than a wedding? After all, it was at a family event that you chose to humiliate my daughter. It seemed fitting to return the favor. He turned to the shell-shocked guests. I apologize for disrupting your evening. The bar will remain open, though I suspect the celebration is over. With that, he walked over to Melissa and extended his hand. Ready to go home, sweetheart? As they moved toward the exit, Dominic's desperate voice rang out. This isn't over, Mercer. Vince paused, looking back one last time. Actually, Dominic, it is. For you anyway. Chapter 6, Aftermath. The fallout from the wedding was swift and devastating. By Monday morning, Richard Preston had initiated an emergency board meeting at Dominic's practice. By Wednesday, the medical board had launched a formal investigation. By Friday, Dominic's hospital privileges had been suspended pending review. Natalie called Vince repeatedly in the days following the wedding, alternating between tearful pleas and venomous accusations. He let most calls go to voicemail, prioritizing Melissa, who had requested to stay with him full-time. She knew. Melissa revealed during a quiet evening at home. Mom knew what Dominic was planning to say about me. I heard them arguing about it the night before the wedding. Vince kept his expression neutral, though inside he burned with fresh anger. What did she say? She told him it was a bad idea, that it would backfire. Melissa's hands tightened around her mug of hot chocolate. But she didn't say it was wrong or a lie. She just worried about how it would look. When Vince finally agreed to meet Natalie, it was at a neutral location, a private room at his attorney's office with Franklin present. Natalie arrived looking nothing like the radiant bride of a week earlier. Her eyes were shadowed, her movements tense. Is this what you wanted? She demanded as soon as the door closed. Complete destruction? You're being dramatic, Vince replied coolly. Dominic's legal troubles are his own doing. The investigation would have happened eventually, with or without my involvement. His practice is collapsing. Our assets are frozen. The house, her voice broke. We might lose everything. Again, consequences of his actions, not mine. I simply accelerated the timeline. Natalie's composure cracked. This isn't just about Dominic. You've destroyed me too. My reputation, my standing in the community. I can't even go to the grocery store without whispers following me. Interesting how consequences feel like persecution when they finally catch up to you, Vince observed. But let's focus on why we're really here. Melissa wants to live with me full-time. Natalie's face crumpled. She's my daughter. You can't take her from me. I'm not taking her. She's choosing. Vince slid a document across the table. A modified custody agreement. You'll have visitation rights, but primary physical custody transfers to me. I won't sign this, Natalie declared, pushing it away. Then we go back to court, Franklin interjected smoothly. Were we present evidence that you were complicit in a scheme to falsely challenge your daughter's paternity, causing her significant emotional distress? Evidence provided by your own fiancé, who's currently looking for anyone to blame but himself. Natalie paled. Dominic wouldn't. He already has. Vince interrupted. He's told the medical board that you knew about the billing irregularities, that you encouraged him to expand too quickly, that the pressure of maintaining your lifestyle drove him to cut corners. That's not true. Natalie protested. I know, Vince agreed, but it's his word against yours, and right now, you're both equally credible, which is to say, not at all. Natalie stared at him, really seeing him perhaps for the first time since their divorce. You planned all of this, didn't you? From the beginning. Harper, Richard, the investigation, it was all orchestrated. I prefer to think of it as being thorough, Vince replied. Something I learned in the military. Always secure your position before engaging the enemy. Enemy, Natalie repeated bitterly. Is that what I am to you now? You made yourself my enemy the moment you brought your lover into my home. Into my daughter's home, Vince corrected. Everything since has just been the natural progression of that choice. Natalie was silent for a long moment, tears slipping down her cheeks. What happened to you, Vince? You never used to be this cold. I adapted, he replied simply. Now, about the custody agreement. I want to see her, Natalie interrupted. Before I sign anything, I need to talk to Melissa. That's her decision, not mine, Vince said. I'll ask her if she's willing to meet with you. 3 days later, Melissa agreed to see her mother at a cafe near Vince's home. Vince waited in his car across the street, respecting their privacy while remaining nearby if Melissa needed him. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. When Melissa emerged, her expression was composed but sad. She slid into the passenger seat of Vince's car without speaking. "Okay," he asked gently. Melissa nodded. She cried a lot, said she was sorry about the wedding and everything with Dominic. After a pause, she added, "She signed the papers." Vince reached over and squeezed her hand. "This isn't permanent, you know. If at any point you want to spend more time with your mom, we can revisit the arrangement." "I know," Melissa said, "but right now I just want things to be quiet for a while." 2 weeks later, the first criminal charges were filed against Dominic: insurance fraud, falsifying medical records, and performing procedures without proper consent. His reputation in ruins, his practice collapsing, and his legal fees mounting, Dominic made a desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. He filed a lawsuit against Vince, claiming defamation, business interference, and emotional distress. Franklin called with the news, amusement evident in his voice. He's representing himself. First sign of a man truly at the end of his rope. "Let him file," Vince responded calmly. "Every allegation gives us another opportunity to present evidence in court." The lawsuit never made it to trial. 3 days after filing, Dominic withdrew it without explanation. The same evening, a breaking news story revealed why. He had been arrested trying to board a private plane to a non-extradition country, carrying false identification and over $200,000 in cash. "Did you know he would run?" Leo asked when they met for drinks that weekend. "I considered it a likely outcome," Vince admitted. "Men like Dominic don't face consequences. They evade them." "But how did the authorities know about the plane?" Vince just smiled, offering no answer. As summer turned to fall, the chaos gradually subsided. Dominic remained in custody, denied bail as a flight risk. His criminal trial was scheduled for the following spring, with state and federal charges ensuring he would face significant prison time regardless of which case proceeded first. Natalie, left to deal with the financial and social fallout, eventually sold the lake house and moved to a smaller home across town. She found work managing a boutique, a significant step down from her previous lifestyle, but enough to support herself. She maintained her visitation with Melissa, their relationship slowly mending as Dominic's toxic influence faded. Vince watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. His company continued to thrive. His relationship with Melissa grew stronger, and the calculated revenge he'd set in motion had exceeded even his expectations. When his mother visited for Thanksgiving, she observed the change in him. "You seem at peace," she noted as they sat on his deck, watching Melissa swim laps in the pool below. "More than I've seen since before the divorce." "I am," Vince acknowledged. "Everything's as it should be." "And Natalie? Dominic?" "That chapter's closed." Vince considered the question. Dominic will face justice through the legal system. As for Natalie, he paused. "She's Melissa's mother. That connection will always exist." But the anger, his mother pressed. The need for retribution. Justice was served, Vince said simply. "That's enough." His mother studied him closely. "Just be careful, Vincent. Revenge can consume a person if they let it become their purpose." "It was never about revenge," Vince replied, though they both knew the distinction was semantic at best. "It was about consequences." As Melissa climbed out of the pool and waved up at them, Vince felt a rare moment of complete contentment. The reckoning he had promised had been delivered, and while he took no joy in Natalie's struggling circumstances, he felt no sympathy either. Every outcome had stemmed directly from choices she and Dominic had made. That evening, after his mother had gone to bed and Melissa was doing homework in her room, Vince withdrew the leather notebook from his safe. He flipped through pages of meticulous notes, contingency plans, and tracked outcomes. At the back, several pages remained blank, space he'd reserved for possible complications or extended operations. With deliberate movements, he tore out those empty pages, fed them into the shredder beside his desk, then returned the notebook to the safe. The final act of letting go, or so he thought. The next morning, Vince's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Normally, he would have ignored it, but something compelled him to answer. "Mr. Mercer?" A woman's unfamiliar voice came through the line. "My name is Diana Calloway. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance in Dominic Russo." Vince went very still. "What can I do for you, Ms. Calloway?" "Actually," she replied, "I think there's something I can do for you. Information you might find useful about Natalie, Dominic, and others in their circle. Things they wouldn't want made public." "Why would you offer this to me?" Vince asked carefully. There was a pause before Diana answered. "Let's just say I recognize a man who understands the value of consequences. And I have scores of my own to settle." Vince found himself at an unexpected crossroads. The rational choice was to decline, to maintain the closure he'd achieved. The reckoning was complete. Further action would be purely vindictive. But as Diana Calloway continued speaking, detailing connections and conspiracies that extended far beyond Natalie and Dominic, something shifted in Vince's expression, a coldness settling behind his eyes that would have been familiar to anyone who knew him well. "I'm listening," he said. Chapter 7, New Alliances. Diana Calloway was nothing like Vince had imagined. Based on Dominic's pattern, he'd expected a trophy type, beautiful but ultimately interchangeable. Instead, the woman who met him at an upscale restaurant in the financial district was sharp-eyed, poised, and clearly intelligent. Mid-30s, professionally dressed in a tailored suit, with an elegant short haircut that framed a face more interesting than conventionally pretty. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her handshake firm. "I wasn't sure you would." "Curiosity," Vince replied simply, taking the seat across from her. "Though I should be clear, my issues with Dominic and Natalie are resolved. I'm not looking to reopen old wounds." Diana's smile was knowing. "Of course not. That would be petty, wouldn't it?" She signaled the waiter for wine before continuing. "But what if I told you their deception went deeper than you realize? That your ex-wife and her imprisoned fiancé were merely players in something much larger?" Vince maintained a neutral expression, though his interest was piqued. "I'm listening." "First, context," Diana said, leaning forward. "I'm not just Dominic's former, whatever we were. I'm a financial investigator with the State Banking Commission. My relationship with Dominic began as professional. His practice was flagged in a routine audit. The personal element was a calculated decision to gain access." "You were investigating him officially?" Vince asked, surprised this hadn't emerged during Dominic's arrest. "Not exactly. My department was looking into a network of businesses engaged in what appeared to be elaborate money laundering. Dominic's practice showed patterns consistent with a front operation: irregular cash flows, inconsistent billing, unusual international wire transfers." The waiter arrived with wine, interrupting momentarily. When he departed, Vince studied Diana with new intensity. "If this is true, why are you bringing it to me instead of your agency?" Diana took a measured sip of wine. "Because the investigation was shut down abruptly 6 months ago. My supervisor claimed insufficient evidence, but internal documents disappeared, and I was reassigned to mortgage fraud in small regional banks. Effectively sidelined." "You believe someone intervened?" It wasn't a question, but Diana nodded. "I know they did. The same week our investigation was terminated, my supervisor purchased a vacation home he couldn't possibly afford on his salary. 2 weeks later, he announced early retirement." "And you think Natalie is involved in this?" Vince asked skeptically. "She's many things, but a sophisticated financial criminal isn't one of them." Not knowingly, perhaps, Diana conceded. "But the Fairchild Foundation, the charity board where she met Dominic, is at the center of the network. Every major donor and board member connects to businesses we flagged for suspicious activity." Vince leaned back, considering. "Even if this is true, what's your interest in telling me? What do you want?" Diana's expression hardened slightly. "Justice. I've spent 3 years tracking these people, only to be shut down when I got close. You've demonstrated both the resources and the determination to see things through, regardless of opposition. You want me to continue your investigation." "I want to continue it together," she corrected. "I have the financial expertise and insider knowledge. You have the private resources and proven ability to act outside official channels when necessary." Vince was silent for a long moment. What you're suggesting isn't just exposing financial crimes. You're talking about confronting powerful people who've already demonstrated they can influence government agencies. Yes, Diana didn't flinch. People who believe themselves untouchable. People who ruined your marriage and tried to steal your daughter's paternity just because it suited their purposes. The mention of Melissa shifted something in Vince's expression. You said Natalie wasn't knowingly involved. Explain. Diana withdrew a slim tablet from her bag, tapping to bring up documents. Natalie was sponsored onto the Fairchild board by Evelyn Porter, your former mother-in-law. This genuinely surprised Vince. Evelyn barely has the funds to maintain her country club membership. How does she have influence with a major foundation? That's where it gets interesting. Diana showed him a document. Evelyn Porter isn't just a social climber with a taste for martinis. Before her marriage, she was Evelyn Fairchild. Vince stared at the document, pieces clicking into place. She's related to the foundation's founder. His niece, Diana confirmed. Though she was essentially disinherited when she married beneath her station, her father's words, not mine. The family maintained social connections, but cut her off financially. She spent decades trying to regain her position in that world. Using Natalie as her vehicle, Vince concluded, thinking of Evelyn's constant pressure on her daughter to make the right connections. Exactly. And when Natalie married you, a self-made man with no family connections, it derailed Evelyn's plans. She needed Natalie connected to someone within their circle. Dominic, Vince said, his jaw tightening. The affair wasn't just about attraction. It was orchestrated. Diana nodded. Orchestrated, encouraged, and protected. The foundation provided the perfect cover for their meetings. I believe Evelyn knew about the affair from the beginning, possibly even arranged the introduction. The implications settled over Vince like a cold weight. Not just betrayal by his wife, but a calculated plan involving her family. This feels speculative, he said finally. Do you have evidence? Some, Diana admitted. Not enough for legal action, which is why I need your help. But I can show you communications between Evelyn and the foundation chairman discussing the Natalie situation months before your divorce. The waiter approached to take their order, but Vince waved him off. His appetite had disappeared. Let's say I believe you. What exactly are you proposing? Diana leaned forward, her voice low but intense. A joint operation. I provide the financial intelligence and insider knowledge. You provide the resources and operational expertise. Together, we expose not just the individuals but the entire network. With what end goal? Justice, Diana repeated. Criminal charges for those who deserve them. Public exposure for those who've hidden behind respectability. And for me, professional vindication. And for me, Vince asked quietly. Diana met his gaze directly. Closure. Real closure. Not just the surface-level consequences you've already delivered. Dominic and Natalie were symptoms of a larger disease. Don't you want to eliminate the root cause? The question lingered between them. Vince had believed the chapter closed, the reckoning complete. But the idea that larger forces had been at work, that his family had been deliberately targeted as part of someone else's agenda, it rekindled something cold and focused within him. I'll need to verify your information independently, he said finally, before I commit to anything. Diana smiled slightly. I would expect nothing less. Take this. She slid a small encrypted drive across the table. Review it thoroughly. It contains everything I've collected, financial records, communications, connections. My contact information is included. When you're ready to discuss next steps, call me. As they parted outside the restaurant, Diana added one final thought. Your reputation suggests you're methodical, Mr. Mercer. Not impulsive. Take your time. But know this. The people who orchestrated your family's destruction are still out there, still operating, still believing themselves untouchable. Over the next 2 weeks, Vince did exactly as he'd promised. He verified. Using Apex Securities' resources and his connections, he independently confirmed Diana's core claims. The Fairchild Foundation's financial irregularities were real. Evelyn's familial connection was documented. The timing of Natalie's introduction to Dominic aligned perfectly with Evelyn's communications with Foundation leadership. Most damning of all, Vince discovered messages between Evelyn and Natalie from the early days of the affair, with Evelyn actively encouraging her daughter to pursue Dominic despite her marriage. "He's the kind of connection our family needs," Evelyn had written. "Vincent was always temporary, a stepping stone. Dominic is the real future." When Vince finally called Diana, his voice was calm but resolute. "I'm in, but we do this my way. Methodical, incremental, and absolutely bulletproof." "Understood," Diana agreed. "When do we start?" "We already have," Vince replied. "I've established surveillance on Evelyn Porter and the Fairchild Foundation's chairman. I've also begun background investigations on all board members." "Efficient," Diana sounded impressed. "Any initial findings?" "Nothing conclusive yet, but my team identified regular meetings between key foundation members and representatives from offshore banking entities. They're careful, rotating locations, using cutouts for sensitive communications. This is an amateur hour." "It never was," Diana confirmed. "That's why they've operated successfully for so long. They compartmentalize information and maintain plausible deniability." "Then our first step is clear," Vince decided. "We need someone on the inside. Someone with direct access who can't be traced back to either of us." "That won't be easy," Diana cautioned. "They're cautious about new people, especially after Dominic's arrest." Vince smiled thinly. "Fortunately, they already have someone perfect in place. Someone they believe is fully under their control, desperate for acceptance, and conveniently related to a key player." "Natalie," Diana realized. "But why would she help us?" "She has every reason to hate you." "She won't be helping us knowingly," Vince explained. "She'll be helping herself, or so she'll believe." The plan took shape over the following days. Using financial pressure points Diana identified, combined with Natalie's precarious social position following Dominic's arrest, they created a scenario where Natalie would seek deeper involvement with the foundation to stabilize her circumstances. "Evelyn will champion her," Vince predicted. "She still needs Natalie as her proxy, maybe now more than ever with Dominic removed from the equation." "And once she's further inside," Diana asked. "We monitor and gather intelligence through her devices, which I already have access to from the divorce investigation. We track her meetings, record her conversations, and use her as an unwitting window into their operations." Diana nodded approvingly. "A Trojan horse. But we need to be careful not to expose her to legal jeopardy. Despite everything, she is still your daughter's mother." Vince's expression remained impassive. "This isn't about harming Natalie. It's about using her position to expose those who manipulated her, and by extension, destroyed my family for their own purposes." As predicted, within weeks, Natalie had secured a paid position with the Fairchild Foundation, managing donor relations, a role that gave her access to financial records and high-level meetings. Evelyn, leveraging her family connection, had indeed championed her daughter's appointment. "She's been invited to the chairman's lake house this weekend," Vince informed Diana during one of their regular strategy sessions, held in a secure room at Apex's headquarters. "First time she's been included in their inner circle gatherings." "Perfect timing," Diana replied, reviewing documents on her tablet. "The quarterly financial transfers happen next week. If they're discussing the money movement, Natalie will be present." "My team has already prepared her phone and laptop," Vince confirmed. "Every conversation, every document she accesses, everything she sees and hears will be captured." Diana looked up from her tablet, studying him. "You've done this before, haven't you? This level of surveillance and intelligence gathering goes beyond standard security work." Vince's expression revealed nothing. "My military background included specialized operations." Let's leave it at that. The lake house gathering yielded exactly what they'd hoped for. Through Natalie's compromised devices, they captured hours of conversations between Foundation leadership discussing processing donations through various channels, thinly veiled references to money laundering operations. They documented meetings with unnamed foreign nationals who discussed investment returns in coded language. Most significantly, they recorded the Foundation chairman explicitly instructing Natalie on how to structure donor records to conceal the true sources of funds. "This is gold," Diana murmured, reviewing the evidence. Clear predication for a formal investigation. Multiple federal violations documented. But still not enough, Vince countered. We need the complete network. All players identified, all connections mapped, all beneficiaries exposed. Half measures won't suffice. Over the next 3 months, their operation expanded. Through Natalie's unwitting assistance, they gathered terabytes of data, identified dozens of connected entities, and mapped a complex web of financial transactions spanning multiple countries. That documented meetings, photographed participants, and recorded conversations that implicated not just the foundation leadership, but prominent business figures, 2 state politicians, and a federal judge. At the center of it all, they discovered the true architect, Stanford Fairchild III, the foundation's chairman and Evelyn's cousin. The foundation had been his creation, a vehicle for influence peddling, tax evasion, and money laundering disguised as philanthropy. He's untouchable through conventional means, Diana acknowledged, frustration evident in her voice. Family connections to the governor, financial ties to the state attorney general, and a federal judge in his pocket. Even with everything we've documented, the political will to pursue him doesn't exist. Vince remained calm. Conventional means aren't our only option. Diana eyed him warily. What exactly are you suggesting? Information warfare, Vince explained. We've been collecting evidence for prosecution, but what if we shift our focus to exposure? A coordinated release of information to multiple media outlets simultaneously, with copies to federal agencies that aren't compromised, FBI headquarters rather than local offices, FinCEN direct rather than through regional channels. A reasonable approach, Diana agreed. But these people are experts at managing scandals. They'll deny, discredit sources, and use their influence to bury the story. Not if the evidence is irrefutable and the source is unimpeachable. Vince pulled up a document on his computer. I've been building relationship with Jordan Mitchell. Diana's eyes widened. The investigative journalist? The one who broke the governor's corruption scandal last year. The same. He has the credibility and platform to ensure this story can't be buried. But we need to be strategic about timing and presentation. As they refined their exposure strategy, an unexpected development accelerated their timeline. Natalie, growing more integrated into the foundation's inner workings, was tasked with a special project, establishing a new charitable initiative focused on family advocacy. Through surveillance, Vince and Diana discovered the true purpose, creating a mechanism to influence family court judges in high-net-worth divorce cases, ensuring outcomes favorable to foundation members and allies. The first test case was to be a custody modification involving Vince and Melissa. They're targeting your custody arrangement, Diana informed him during an emergency meeting. Stanford Fairchild has personally directed resources toward finding leverage against you. They're planning to petition for a custody review within the month. For the first time since their partnership began, Vince's composed facade cracked, revealing cold fury beneath. They're involving my daughter again. Directly this time. We need to accelerate, Diana urged. Full exposure immediately. No, Vince countered, already formulating a new approach. We adapt. This changes the battlefield, but it also creates an opportunity. They believe they're the hunters, but they're about to become the prey. The revised strategy was audacious. Instead of external exposure, Vince would allow himself to become the target, using the custody challenge as bait to draw the entire network into a single, coordinated action that could be documented in real time. It's risky, Diana cautioned. They'll be coming after you with everything they have. Good, Vince replied, his expression resolute. Let them commit fully. Let them expose themselves. Let them believe they're winning, right until the moment they lose everything. The trap was set. Through carefully planted information, Vince created the appearance of vulnerability. Financial records suggesting cash flow problems at Apex, manufactured evidence of professional misconduct, and hints of personal issues that could affect his fitness as a parent. Natalie, believing she had discovered this information independently, eagerly shared it with Stanford Fairchild and the foundation leadership. As predicted, they moved aggressively, filing for an emergency custody review and mobilizing their network of influence. What they didn't know was that every move they made was being monitored, recorded, and compiled as evidence of conspiracy, judicial tampering, and extortion. Every phone call, every meeting, every document transfer became another link in the chain Vince was forging around them. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Judge Raymond Hoffman, a foundation beneficiary, would preside. The outcome seemed predetermined. The night before, Vince met with Diana one final time in his secure office. Everything is in place, he confirmed. Jordan has the complete file: financial records, surveillance footage, documented communications. The moment the judge rules, it all goes public simultaneously across multiple platforms. And if something goes wrong? Diana asked. If they somehow detect the trap? Vince's expression was coldly determined. Then I have contingencies. But one way or another, tomorrow ends this permanently. As he walked Diana out, she paused at the door. You know, this will likely implicate Natalie as well. She's deeply involved now, even if she didn't understand the full scope initially. I'm aware, Vince acknowledged. She made her choices, repeatedly. But unlike the others, she'll have an opportunity to cooperate, to mitigate consequences. For Melissa's sake, if nothing else. Diana studied him carefully. You've changed since we started this. The man I approached months ago wanted specific justice against specific people. Now I understand that selective justice isn't justice at all, Vince finished for her. The entire system that enabled them needs to be exposed and dismantled. Half measures would only allow it to continue under different management. After Diana left, Vince spent hours reviewing every detail of the operation, ensuring no vulnerabilities remained. Finally satisfied, he called the one person whose involvement tomorrow would be crucial. Everything set on your end? He asked when Leo answered. All good, his friend confirmed. Team is in position. Surveillance active on all targets. Backup systems ready if primary channels are compromised. And Melissa? Secure at your mother's place in Arizona. No digital footprint, no way to track. She'll be completely isolated from blowback. Vince exhaled slowly. Good. This ends tomorrow, one way or another. As he ended the call, Vince opened his safe and removed the leather notebook that had started it all years ago. The final pages, once torn out, had been replaced with new ones, detailed notes on the expanded operation. On the last page, he had written a single sentence. The reckoning isn't complete until the system itself is held accountable. Tomorrow, that accountability would begin. Chapter 8. The Confrontation. The Westland County Courthouse stood imposing in the morning light, its limestone facade projecting an aura of impartiality and justice that Vince now knew was illusory. He arrived early, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit that projected confidence despite the circumstances. Franklin Rhodes met him at the entrance, briefcase in hand. Final preparations are complete, he murmured as they walked through security. Jordan's team is standing by. Federal contacts are briefed and waiting for the signal. Vince nodded almost imperceptibly. And our courtroom assets? In position. Full audio-visual coverage, redundant systems. Nothing said or done in that room will go unrecorded. Franklin hesitated. Are you certain about this approach? There are less confrontational options. We're past that point, Vince replied as they approached the courtroom. They chose this battlefield. Now they'll face the consequences. Inside, the courtroom was already filling with spectators, a mixture of legal professionals, court reporters, and curious onlookers drawn by the high-profile nature of the case. In the front row sat Evelyn Porter, her expression smug as she whispered to Natalie beside her. Natalie looked uncomfortable, repeatedly checking her phone and glancing toward the door. Behind them sat Stanford Fairchild, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and the practiced poise of generational wealth. He conversed quietly with two other Foundation board members, his demeanor relaxed and confident. When Vince entered, conversations faltered momentarily as all eyes turned to assess him. He met Natalie's gaze briefly, noting the mixture of triumph and unease in her expression. Then his attention shifted to Stanford Fairchild, whose eyes narrowed slightly in appraisal. All principal targets present, Vince murmured to Franklin as they took their seats. At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Raymond Hoffman entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. Unlike most family court proceedings, this hearing had been fast-tracked and given priority, a clear indication of the influence being exerted behind the scenes. We're here regarding case number FC 2023-8716, a petition for modification of custody arrangements between Natalie Porter, formerly Mercer, and Vincent Mercer. Judge Hoffman announced, his tone suggesting this was routine despite the irregular process. I've reviewed the file materials and supporting documentation. Natalie's attorney, a polished woman named Vanessa Dawson, who specialized in high-net-worth custody battles, rose first. Your Honor, we're seeking an emergency modification based on substantial changes in circumstances affecting the welfare of the minor child, Melissa Mercer. Proceed, Judge Hoffman instructed, his attention seemingly focused on papers before him rather than the attorney. For the next 30 minutes, Vanessa presented a masterfully constructed narrative. Vince's business facing financial difficulties, creating instability, alleged evidence of unprofessional conduct in his security operations, suggestions of excessive drinking and inappropriate company at his home, concerns about Melissa's declining academic performance while in his care. Each allegation was supported by documents, affidavits, and expert opinions, all obtained through the Foundation's network of influence and manufactured to create a compelling case for removing primary custody from Vince. Throughout the presentation, Vince remained impassive, making occasional notes, but otherwise showing no reaction to the character assassination unfolding. Franklin, beside him, adopted the same professional detachment. When Vanessa concluded, Judge Hoffman turned to Franklin. Counsel for the respondent, your response? Franklin rose unhurriedly. Your Honor, before addressing these allegations, I'd like to enter several items into evidence regarding the circumstances surrounding this petition. Judge Hoffman frowned slightly. This hearing is specifically about the welfare of the minor child, Counselor. Extraneous matters aren't relevant. With respect, Your Honor, Franklin countered smoothly, these items go directly to the credibility and motivation of the petitioner and supporting witnesses. The rules of evidence clearly permit such considerations. The judge hesitated, visibly uncomfortable but aware of the procedural correctness of the request. Very well. Proceed. Franklin nodded to an assistant, who approached with a sealed package of documents. First, Your Honor, we present evidence documenting a coordinated effort to manufacture false allegations against my client. These records include communications between petitioner Natalie Porter, her mother Evelyn Porter, and several members of the Fairchild Foundation Board, explicitly discussing the fabrication of evidence for today's hearing. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Natalie paled visibly, while Stanford Fairchild sat forward, his confident posture suddenly rigid. Objection! Vanessa Dawson exclaimed. This is an ambush, Your Honor. We haven't been provided these alleged communications in discovery. That's because they weren't in our possession during discovery, Franklin explained calmly. They came into our possession subsequently through legally obtained monitoring of communications directly relevant to ongoing harassment of my client. Before the judge could rule, Franklin continued. Additionally, Your Honor, we have evidence documenting inappropriate communications between participants in this case and this court. He removed a specific document from the package, including 17 phone calls between Your Honor and Stanford Fairchild in the 2 weeks preceding this hearing. The courtroom erupted in shocked exclamations. Judge Hoffman's face flushed crimson. This is outrageous. I will not tolerate. With respect, Your Honor, Franklin interrupted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Given these circumstances, we move for your immediate recusal due to clear conflict of interest. We have simultaneously filed a complaint with the Judicial Conduct Commission, supported by complete documentation of judicial misconduct. For a moment, Judge Hoffman seemed struck speechless. Then, recovering, he banged his gavel furiously. This court is in recess. Counselors in my chambers immediately. As the judge stormed out, chaos engulfed the courtroom. Natalie turned to her mother, panic evident on her face. Stanford Fairchild was already on his phone, speaking urgently while moving toward the exit. Vince remained seated, outwardly calm amid the tumult. When Franklin leaned over to whisper something, Vince shook his head slightly. "Wait," he murmured. 3, 2, 1. The courtroom doors opened, and 6 individuals in suits entered, moving with purposeful authority. The lead agent approached Stanford Fairchild, intercepting him before he could exit. "Stanford Fairchild?" the agent asked, though it clearly wasn't a question. "I'm Special Agent Daniels with the FBI. These are my colleagues from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice." Simultaneously, other agents approached Evelyn Porter and 2 Foundation board members, presenting similar warrants. The coordinated operation unfolded, exactly as Vince had planned. Natalie, witnessing everything from her seat, turned to Vince with dawning horror. "What have you done?" she whispered. "I didn't do anything," Vince replied evenly. "These are simply the consequences of your choices. All of your choices." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "You might want to call a criminal defense attorney. Agent Daniels will be speaking with you next." As he turned to leave, Natalie grabbed his arm desperately. "They told me it was just about the custody. I didn't know about the other things, the financial crimes, the corruption. You have to believe me." Vince looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the fragments of the woman he'd once loved buried beneath layers of self-deception. "What I believe doesn't matter anymore, Natalie. What matters is what you can prove, and what they can prove about you." "Melissa," Natalie gasped, sudden realization in her eyes. "This will destroy her if I go to prison. Please, Vince, for her sake." "I've already considered Melissa," Vince assured her, his voice softening slightly. "Agent Daniels has a cooperation agreement prepared. Full disclosure about the Foundation's operations in exchange for consideration in charging decisions. It won't erase consequences, but it might mitigate them." Relief flooded Natalie's face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me," Vince corrected her. "I didn't do this for you. I did it for our daughter, who deserves at least one parent who isn't serving a federal sentence." As he walked out of the courtroom, Franklin fell into step beside him. "Perfectly executed," the lawyer commented. "Jordan's expose is already live, simultaneous publication in 3 major outlets. Social media is exploding. The story broke nationally 2 minutes after the arrest began. And Judge Hoffman, U.S. Marshals took him into custody in his chambers. Apparently, he was attempting to shred documents when they arrived." Vince nodded, satisfied. Outside the courthouse, a media frenzy was developing, reporters rushing toward the entrance as news of the high-profile arrest spread. He bypassed them, heading for a black SUV waiting at the curb where Leo sat behind the wheel. "It's done," Leo asked as Vince slid into the passenger seat. "Phase 1 is complete," Vince confirmed. "The primary targets are in custody. The evidence is public. Now we monitor for secondary reactions." "You think there will be blowback?" "Guaranteed," Vince replied, checking his phone as multiple messages came through. "An operation this size has connections we haven't yet identified. They'll react to protect themselves." And Diana, secured at a federal safe house, preparing her official statement as a whistleblower. Her position is protected now that the investigation is public. Leo navigated through traffic, heading toward Vince's office rather than his home, another security precaution in their contingency planning. "What about Melissa? When do you tell her?" Vince's expression softened slightly at the mention of his daughter. "Tonight. I'll fly to Arizona, explain everything in person. She deserves to hear it from me, not from news reports or social media." "How much will you tell her?" "Everything," Vince decided after a moment's consideration. "She's 15, not a child anymore. She deserves the truth about Natalie, about Evelyn, about all of it." Later that evening, in his mother's modest Scottsdale home, Vince sat with Melissa on the back patio, the desert sunset painting the sky in dramatic orange and purple as he explained the events of the day and the months of investigation leading up to it. Melissa listened silently, her expression shifting between shock, anger, and grief as the full scope of her mother and grandmother's actions became clear. "So Mom's going to prison?" she finally asked, her voice small. "That depends on her choices now," Vince answered honestly. "If she cooperates fully, tells the truth about everything she knows, she might avoid prison time. Community service, probation, restitution, those are possible alternatives." And Grandma Evelyn? Vince didn't soften this truth. Her involvement was deeper, more knowing. Prison time is likely, though her age and health might be considered mitigating factors. Melissa was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she asked the question Vince had been dreading. "Did you plan this from the beginning? Since the divorce? Since the wedding?" "Not this specifically," Vince answered carefully. "Initially, I sought justice for more personal betrayals. But as I discovered the broader conspiracy, the true scope of manipulation and corruption, my focus expanded." "Because they try to take me away from you?" Melissa pressed, surprisingly perceptive. "That was part of it," Vince acknowledged. "But also because what they were doing was wrong, exploiting people, corrupting the legal system, using their influence to avoid consequences. They needed to be stopped, not just for us, but for everyone they were harming." Melissa considered this, her brow furrowed in thought. "Mom says you never forgive people who betray you, that you're ruthless when you've been wronged." Vince felt a pang at his daughter hearing him described this way, but he couldn't deny the essential truth of it. "I believe in consequences," he said finally. "When someone deliberately causes harm, especially to those I love, I believe they should face the results of their actions. That's not quite the same as never forgiving." "But you don't forgive, Mom," Melissa observed, not accusingly but matter-of-factly. "Forgiveness is complicated," Vince replied after a thoughtful pause. "I've let go of anger toward your mother. I don't wish her harm. But trust, once broken completely, can't always be repaired. That's the reality we live with." Melissa nodded slowly, seeming to understand something profound about human relationships despite her youth. "What happens now? To us, I mean." "That's partly up to you," Vince told her, reaching out to take her hand. "Nothing changes with our arrangement immediately. You'll stay with me while your mother's legal situation develops. After that, we'll figure it out together based on what's best for you." As darkness fell over the desert, Vince and Melissa sat in companionable silence, both contemplating the dramatic reshaping of their family landscape. The reckoning Vince had set in motion years ago had expanded far beyond his initial conception, touching lives and institutions he'd never anticipated. Yet as he watched his daughter, resilient, thoughtful, and ultimately the most important person in his universe, he felt no regret for the path he'd chosen. Justice had been served, consequences delivered. The system that had enabled the corruption of his family had been exposed and would be dismantled. It was enough. It had to be enough. But even as he thought this, Vince's phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. Secondary targets responding. Financial movements detected. Cleanup operation initiated. Call secure line immediately. The reckoning, it seemed, was not yet complete. Chapter 9. Ashes and Rebirth. The aftermath of what the media dubbed the Fairchild Conspiracy unfolded with the intensity of a wildfire, consuming reputations, careers, and institutions with equal ferocity. In the 3 months following the courthouse confrontation, federal indictments targeted 37 individuals across multiple states, including 2 state senators, a federal judge for prominent attorneys, and 11 business executives. The Fairchild Foundation was placed under court-ordered receivership, its assets frozen pending investigation of money laundering allegations spanning more than a decade. Stanford Fairchild, denied bail as a flight risk, awaited trial from a federal detention center, his empire crumbling around him. For Vince, the period was one of careful navigation, balancing cooperation with federal investigators, protection of his family, and management of the inevitable blowback from those whose interests he'd damaged. The secondary targets are more concerning than the primaries, Diana explained during one of their secure communications. Now officially recognized as a federal whistleblower, she worked directly with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, her previous expertise finally properly utilized. They're less visible, but often more dangerous, she continued. People who benefited from the corruption without direct involvement. People with resources and motivation to protect themselves by eliminating potential threats. Vince understood the warning. His security protocols remained at maximum, with Melissa still staying at his mother's Arizona home, enrolled temporarily in a local private school while the situation stabilized. Natalie, true to Vince's prediction, had chosen cooperation. Faced with potential felony charges, she accepted a deal requiring full disclosure of everything she knew about the foundation's operations, financial transactions, and influence networks. Her testimony implicated Evelyn deeply, revealing her mother's central role in connecting legitimate business interests with the foundation's money laundering infrastructure. The evidence Natalie provided, combined with Diana's insider knowledge and Vince's meticulously gathered intelligence, created an airtight case against the primary conspirators. But as Diana had warned, the secondary targets, those whose names appeared in financial records but whose direct involvement was harder to prove, remained at large and active. They're liquidating assets, moving funds offshore, and erasing connections, Leo reported during a secure briefing at Apex headquarters. Classic preparation for either disappearing or rebuilding under new identities. Any direct threats identified? Vince asked, reviewing the monitoring reports. Nothing specific yet, Leo answered, but increased activity around your personal information. Multiple unauthorized attempts to access your financial records, property ownership details, travel patterns. Reconnaissance, Vince concluded. They're establishing my routines, looking for vulnerabilities. I've enhanced all security protocols, Leo assured him. Changed the rotation schedules for the protection teams, implemented counter-surveillance measures. They're watching, but they're not seeing anything useful. Vince nodded, satisfied with the precautions but under no illusions about the danger. People with wealth and influence, facing potential ruin, were capable of extreme measures. The first concrete threat emerged 6 weeks after the arrests. A junior associate at Apex Security discovered embedded malware in the company's communication systems. Sophisticated surveillance software traced to a cybersecurity firm with connections to one of the foundation's board members. They were monitoring our operations, Vince explained to Franklin during an in-person meeting in a secured room swept for devices. Tracking our investigation in real time, probably for months. That explains how they accelerated the custody challenge, Franklin observed. They knew you were closing in, try to disrupt your focus with a personal attack. Classic diversion tactic, Vince agreed. And it might have worked if we hadn't anticipated it. The cyber intrusion was just the beginning. 2 days later, an Apex employee's vehicle was run off the road by an unmarked SUV that fled the scene. The employee, part of the team that had conducted surveillance on Stanford Fairchild, sustained minor injuries. The message was clear. Direct intimidation had begun. Vince responded by accelerating his own contingency plans. Working with federal authorities through Diana's connections, he provided comprehensive evidence packages against 12 secondary targets. Evidence he had withheld from the initial release, anticipating exactly this scenario. These go public immediately if anything happens to me, my family, or my employees, he instructed Diana. Full distribution to media, law enforcement, and regulatory agencies, with authentication protocols ensuring the source can't be discredited. Dead man's switch, Diana noted. Smart, but do they know about it? They will, Vince assured her. Anonymous delivery of redacted samples to each target should make the situation clear. The warning worked, partially. The direct intimidation ceased, but shifted to legal and financial pressure. Apex Security faced sudden regulatory audits, client contracts mysteriously canceled, and a coordinated negative media campaign suggesting ethical violations in Vince's business practices. They're trying to destroy your credibility, Franklin observed. Undermine your standing as a witness and damage your financial base. Expected, Vince replied calmly. We prepared for this phase. Indeed, Vince had insulated Apex from such attacks months earlier, transferring majority ownership to a trust benefiting Melissa, with Leo installed as CEO. His personal assets have been similarly protected through structures that would withstand prolonged legal assault. The pressure campaign culminated in a defamation lawsuit filed by Elliott Chambers, a real estate developer with documented financial ties to the Fairchild Foundation. The suit alleged Vince had falsely implicated Chambers in criminal activity, damaging his reputation and business interests. Rather than fight defensively, Vince counterattacked. Through Franklin, he filed a RICO countersuit naming Chambers and 7 other secondary targets, alleging coordinated illegal actions including witness intimidation, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The legal maneuver, combined with another carefully timed release of evidence to federal investigators, forced Chambers to withdraw his lawsuit within weeks. 3 of the other named individuals quietly left the country shortly thereafter. "You've neutralized the immediate threats," Diana acknowledged during a secure video conference. "But there will be others. People with this kind of wealth and influence play the long game." "So do I," Vince replied simply. Throughout this period of external conflict, Vince maintained regular contact with Melissa through secure channels, visiting Arizona monthly while ensuring no traceable pattern could be established. These visits became a sanctuary of normalcy amid the storm, hiking in the desert, cooking together in his mother's kitchen, discussing books and future plans rather than the ongoing legal battles. During one such visit, as they watched the sunset from a high desert trail, Melissa asked the question that had clearly been weighing on her. "When does it end, Dad? The fighting, the looking over our shoulders, all of it." Vince considered his answer carefully. "The legal proceedings will take years to fully resolve, but the acute danger phase is winding down. Most of the principal figures are either in custody or have accepted plea agreements. The secondary threats are being contained." "That's not what I meant," Melissa clarified. "When does the reckoning end for you? When is it enough?" The question struck deeper than Vince expected, forcing him to examine motivations he'd kept carefully compartmentalized. "It's not about revenge anymore," he said finally. "Hasn't been for some time. It's about completing what we started, ensuring that everyone involved faces appropriate consequences, that the systems they corrupted are reformed, that justice is fully served." Melissa studied him with eyes too perceptive for her years. "And after that, what then?" It was a question Vince hadn't fully confronted. The reckoning had been his driving purpose for so long that its eventual conclusion seemed like a distant abstraction. Yet Melissa's question demanded a concrete answer. "After that," he said slowly, "we rebuild. Not just recover or move on. Actively build something better than what was lost." Melissa seemed satisfied with this answer, turning her attention back to the spectacular desert sunset. But the question lingered in Vince's mind, challenging him to envision a future beyond the conflict that had defined recent years. That future began taking shape sooner than expected. 10 months after the courthouse confrontation, with the primary legal proceedings well advanced and the secondary threats largely neutralized, Vince received an unexpected call from Diana. "It's over," she announced without preamble. "The last 3 secondary targets accepted plea deals this morning. Full cooperation, complete disclosure, substantial penalties. The entire network is mapped and contained." Vince absorbed this information silently, feeling neither triumph nor satisfaction, just a quiet recognition that a significant chapter was closing. "What about you?" he asked. "Your position with the investigation?" "Officially recognized as the primary whistleblower," Diana replied. "My career with the Banking Commission is obviously over, but I've been offered a consulting position with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. A chance to continue the work with proper support this time." "You'll take it?" "I think so," Diana said, "though I'm considering all options. This experience has been clarifying about what matters to me professionally." After ending the call, Vince stood at his office window overlooking the city, contemplating the landscape of his life. The reckoning that had consumed him for years was approaching its conclusion. The justice he'd sought had been delivered, the consequences distributed appropriately. Yet the question remained, what now? The answer began forming during a conversation with Franklin Rhodes the following week, as they discussed the final details of Natalie's cooperation agreement. She's provided everything they asked for, Franklin reported. The prosecutor is recommending probation rather than incarceration, given the value of her testimony and her limited knowledge of the criminal aspects. Good, Vince said, genuinely relieved for Melissa's sake. And supervised visitation with Melissa? Possible within 6 months, pending completion of mandated therapy and parenting classes. Franklin hesitated before adding, "She's asked to speak with you directly. No lawyers, no formal setting." Vince's first instinct was refusal. What could possibly remain to be said between them? But after reflection, he recognized the need for closure, not just for Natalie, but for himself and ultimately for Melissa. They met at a neutral location, a private room at a downtown restaurant during off hours. Natalie looked markedly different from the polished society figure she'd been striving to become. Simpler clothes, minimal makeup, a certain heaviness in her bearing that spoke of hard-earned wisdom. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, her voice lacking its former confident edge. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I," Vince admitted, studying her with detached curiosity. "What did you want to discuss?" Natalie took a deep breath. "First, to say I'm sorry. Not just for the affair or the divorce, but for everything that came after. The custody battles, the lies, involving Melissa in adult conflicts. All of it." "Apology noted," Vince replied, neither accepting nor rejecting it. "I know that doesn't change anything," Natalie continued. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just needed to say it directly, without lawyers or judges present." Vince nodded, acknowledging her words. "What else?" "I want to know what happens next," Natalie said. "With Melissa, with our coexistence as her parents, however that looks going forward." It was a fair question, one that required honest engagement rather than tactical positioning. The legal battle was essentially over. What remained was the human challenge of restructuring family relationships around new realities. "Melissa stays with me as her primary residence," Vince stated firmly. "That's non-negotiable given recent events." "Understand," Natalie agreed quickly. "I'm not contesting that. I just want to know if there's a path forward where I can be part of her life in a meaningful way, where we can interact without hostility or manipulation." Vince considered this carefully. His instinct for absolute victory, for complete separation between Natalie and their daughter, collided with the more complex reality of what would truly serve Melissa's long-term interests. "That depends on you," he said finally. "On consistent demonstration that you've changed, that you understand boundaries, that you prioritize Melissa's well-being over your own desires or social positioning." "I can do that," Natalie insisted. "I'm doing that. The therapy, the classes, they're not just to satisfy court requirements. I'm trying to understand how I got here, how I let my mother's values override my own, how I lost sight of what really mattered." For the first time in years, Vince detected genuine self-reflection in Natalie's words. Not calculation or manipulation, but authentic recognition of her own failings. "Then there's a path," he acknowledged. "Not back to what was before. That's gone forever. But forward to something workable for Melissa's sake." Relief softened Natalie's features. "Thank you. That's all I'm asking for. A chance to be better, to repair what I can." As their conversation concluded, Natalie asked one final question. "Did you ever love me, Vince? Really love me? Sometimes I wonder if it was all just performative, if you were playing a role you thought was expected." The question surprised him, both in its directness and its insight. After careful consideration, he answered honestly, "Yes, I loved you. Not always in ways you recognized or valued, perhaps. But yes, it was real." Natalie nodded, acceptance rather than satisfaction in her expression. "Thank you for that. It helps somehow, knowing it was real for both of us, even if we lost it along the way." That evening, Vince called Melissa in Arizona with news that she could return home within a month. The acute danger had passed, and with appropriate security protocols, she could resume her normal life. Really, her excitement was palpable even through the phone. "Back to my school, my friends, everything, almost everything," Vince clarified. "There will still be security measures, and some aspects of our lives will remain changed. But yes, essentially back to normal. What about Mom? Melissa asked cautiously. Will I be able to see her? Eventually, Vince confirmed. She's working through a process that will make that possible. It will take time, but yes, she'll be part of your life. The relief in Melissa's voice reinforced his conviction that this was the right approach. Despite everything, Natalie was her mother. Complete excision would create a wound that might never fully heal. In the weeks that followed, Vince dismantled the infrastructure of the reckoning. Surveillance operations were concluded, intelligence assets reallocated, the secure communication networks used with Diana decommissioned. The leather notebook, its purpose fulfilled, was finally consigned to the shredder, its contents fully destroyed. As this chapter closed, Vince found himself contemplating Diana's earlier question about his professional future. The experience had revealed capabilities and insights that could serve broader purposes than private security for wealthy clients. 3 months later, Vince announced a significant restructuring of Apex Security. While the core business would continue under Leo's leadership, Vince was establishing a new division, Apex Accountability Group, specializing in corporate malfeasance investigations, financial fraud detection, and systemic corruption exposure. Turning your reckoning expertise into a business model, Franklin observed during the launch reception. Clever pivot. More than a business model, Vince corrected. A mission. The Fairchild case exposed vulnerabilities in supposedly secure systems, demonstrated how wealth and influence can corrupt justice. There's important work to be done addressing that systematically. Diana, who had accepted a consulting position with the new division, joined their conversation. It's more than just catching bad actors. It's about changing the underlying systems that enable them. That's the real challenge. And the real opportunity, Vince added. Individual reckonings have limited impact. Systemic reform is how lasting change happens. The reception continued around them, a carefully curated mix of business leaders, legal professionals, and government representatives. Among them was Jordan Mitchell, the investigative journalist whose reporting had been instrumental in exposing the Fairchild Network. Your new venture is generating significant interest, Jordan commented, joining their small group. People are particularly intrigued by your partnership with Diana, the whistleblower and the Avenger, teaming up officially. We prefer accountability specialists, Diana replied with a wry smile. Less dramatic, more professional, but less headline-worthy, Jordan countered good-naturedly. As the evening progressed, Vince found himself observing the interactions around him with a newfound perspective. The reckoning that had consumed his focus for years had evolved into something more constructive, channeling the skills and determination forged in conflict toward preventing similar abuses of power. Later that week, Vince sat in the bleachers watching Melissa's swim meet. She'd rejoined her team after returning from Arizona, quickly reclaiming her position as one of their strongest competitors. As she cut through the water with powerful strokes, Vince felt a surge of pride, not just in her athletic ability, but in her resilience through everything the past years had thrown at her. Beside him, somewhat awkwardly, sat Natalie. Their new co-parenting arrangement included attending important events together when possible, a practice recommended by Melissa's therapist to demonstrate unified support despite their separation. She's really excelling, Natalie commented as Melissa finished a race in first place. Coach says she could be competitive at the state level next year. If that's what she wants, Vince agreed. She mentioned interest in academic decathlon too. Renaissance teenager. Natalie smiled slightly. She gets that from you. The ability to excel in multiple areas. The conversation remained superficial but cordial, progress from the toxic hostility that had defined their interactions for years. Not friendship, not even warmth, but a functional civility that served their daughter's interests. As Melissa emerged from the locker room after the meet, her face brightened seeing both parents waiting. The complicated adult dynamics didn't diminish her simple happiness at having both parents present for her achievement. That night, after driving Melissa to Natalie's for her scheduled weekend visit, the supervised visitation requirements having been satisfied months earlier, Vince returned home to find Diana waiting on his doorstep. Unscheduled meeting? He inquired, unlocking the door. More of a personal check-in, Diana clarified, following him inside. We've been so focused on the business launch that we haven't discussed the other transition. Which one? Vince asked, pouring them both drinks in the kitchen. From vengeance to whatever comes after, Diana replied directly. You've spent years consumed by this reckoning. Now it's essentially complete. How are you adjusting? It was a perceptive question, one that cut to the heart of Vince's ongoing internal recalibration. He considered it carefully before responding. It's different, he acknowledged. For so long, every decision was filtered through that lens, how it served the larger goal of accountability. Now decisions stand on their own merits. Is that uncomfortable? Diana pressed, having to evaluate each choice without that organizing principle. Not uncomfortable, Vince corrected, clarifying. It reveals what truly matters beneath the tactical considerations. Diana studied him over the rim of her glass. And what does matter now that the dust has settled? Melissa's well-being, building something meaningful through apex accountability, ensuring that systems resistant to corruption replace those we exposed. He paused before adding, personal connections that proved reliable through adversity. Diana nodded, understanding the implications of his last point. Their partnership, forged in shared purpose, had evolved into something deeper over time, not yet fully defined, but significant. Speaking of reliable connections, Diana said, changing the subject slightly, have you spoken with Leo about his role going forward? He's been asking questions about the organizational structure. The conversation shifted to business matters, but the underlying current remained. Two people navigating the transition from wartime alliance to peacetime partnership, with all its complexities and possibilities. 6 months later, the new normal had solidified. Apex accountability had established itself as a formidable force in corporate malfeasance investigations, with 3 major cases successfully concluded and a growing reputation for incorruptible thoroughness. Diana had integrated fully into the leadership team, her financial expertise complementing Vince's strategic and operational capabilities. The Fairchild case participants had largely received their due consequences. Stanford Fairchild, convicted on multiple federal charges, was serving a 15-year sentence. Evelyn Porter had accepted a plea deal resulting in house arrest rather than prison due to health considerations, effectively removed from Melissa's life by mutual agreement. The various secondary figures had faced a mixture of legal penalties, professional disgrace, and financial ruin proportionate to their involvement. Dominic Russo, convicted in a separate case, was 5 years into a 12-year sentence for medical fraud and financial crimes. Vince had neither contacted nor acknowledged him since the wedding confrontation, allowing the justice system to administer the formal punishment while considering the personal account permanently closed. Natalie, having fulfilled all requirements of her cooperation agreement, had rebuilt a modest but stable life. She maintained her visitation with Melissa, gradually repairing their relationship through consistency and genuine contrition. Her attempts at similar reconciliation with Vince had been politely but firmly rebuffed. He maintained necessary contact for Melissa's sake, but offered no forgiveness or friendship beyond that functional minimum. On a crisp fall evening, as Vince reviewed case files in his home office, Melissa knocked on the open door, a college brochure in hand. "Got a minute, Dad?" she asked, now 17 and increasingly self-assured. "Always," Vince replied, setting aside his work. Melissa sat across from him, spreading several brochures on his desk. "I've narrowed it down to these 3 for early applications." "Thoughts?" Vince examined the options, all prestigious universities with strong academic reputations. All excellent choices. Any frontrunner? Northwestern? Maybe, Melissa said. Their criminal justice program is supposed to be amazing. Vince raised an eyebrow. Criminal justice? That's new. Melissa shrugged. Not really. I've been thinking about it for a while. What happened with the Fairchild case, how they manipulated the system, how you and Diana exposed it. It made me realize how important it is to have people working to make the system actually function like it's supposed to. The direction surprised Vince, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Melissa had witnessed firsthand both the corruption of justice and its restoration through determined action. It's demanding work, he cautioned, often thankless, sometimes dangerous. I know, Melissa acknowledged, but it matters. You taught me that, not just by saying it, but by showing it, by demonstrating that when systems fail, individuals with integrity need to step up. Pride mingled with concern in Vince's response. If that's where your passion leads, I'll support you completely. Just promise you'll approach it with eyes open to both the importance and the cost. I will, Melissa assured him. Then, with the directness that increasingly characterized her, she asked, "Do you ever regret it? The years you spent on the reckoning? The toll it took?" Vince considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that you were caught in the crossfire of adult betrayals and manipulations. But the reckoning itself?" He shook his head. "No. Some principles are worth the cost of their defense. Some betrayals require consequences to maintain the moral order of the world." Melissa nodded, seeming to find something valuable in his answer. "I'm going to call Mom about these options, too. She mentioned some alumni connections at Northwestern that might be helpful for applications." "Good idea," Vince agreed, maintaining his policy of supporting Melissa's relationship with her mother despite his own unresolved feelings. Leverage every advantage. After Melissa left, Vince stood at his office window, watching the city lights emerge as dusk deepened into evening. The reckoning that had defined years of his life was truly complete now, not just in external outcomes, but in its integration into the fabric of who he had become. He had not forgiven those who betrayed him. Natalie, Dominic, Evelyn, Stanford, each had received precisely the consequences their actions warranted, neither more nor less. The ledger was balanced, not through emotional absolution, but through proportional justice. Yet the experience had transformed rather than consumed him. The skills honed in pursuit of personal reckoning now served broader purposes. The cold determination that had driven his campaign against specific betrayers now fueled systemic reforms that would prevent countless others from suffering similar injustices. Most importantly, the daughter who had been the innocent victim in the original betrayal had emerged stronger, more discerning, inspired toward a path of meaningful contribution. If there was redemption in the story, it lived in Melissa's resilience and growth. Vince's phone rang, interrupting his reflections. Diana's name appeared on the screen. "We've got movement on the Westridge case," she reported without preamble. "Financial patterns matching what we saw with Fairchild. Looks like someone's picking up where they left off. New players, same game," Vince concluded, already shifting into operational mode. "I'll meet you at the office in 30. As he gathered his materials, Vince felt not weariness but focused purpose. The personal reckoning was complete, its accounts settled. What remained was the broader mission, ensuring that systems meant to deliver justice actually did so, that powerful interests couldn't simply rewrite rules to suit themselves, that betrayal and manipulation carried appropriate costs. It was work worthy of the man he had become, neither defined by vengeance nor softened by misplaced forgiveness, but tempered by experience into something more formidable, an instrument of consequence in a world that too often allowed the powerful to escape them. As he left the house, Vince reflected that while the reckoning had begun as a response to personal betrayal, it had evolved into something more significant, a commitment to a world where actions had consequences, where justice wasn't merely an ideal, but a practiced reality. Not vengeance, but accountability. Not forgiveness, but appropriate resolution. The distinction might seem semantic to some, but to Vince, it made all the difference. For in that distinction lived his personal code. Never forgive betrayal, but channel its lessons